The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of the Denver Children's Hospital as Jonathan Roumie walked quietly down the pediatric ward hallway. He had been visiting young patients as part of his charity work, bringing smiles and hope to children facing difficult medical battles. As he approached room 314, he could hear a young voice speaking angrily to someone inside. What happened next would challenge everything Jonathan thought he knew about faith, doubt, and the power of honest conversation with a hurting child. "I don't want to see anyone else today, especially not some fake Jesus guy," the voice declared with surprising venom for someone so young. Jonathan paused outside the door, recognizing the pain beneath the hostility in those words. He had encountered skepticism before during hospital visits, but something about this child's tone suggested a deeper wound than simple disbelief. The nurse beside him looked apologetic, whispering that 10-year-old Marcus had been refusing all visitors since arriving at the hospital 3 weeks ago. Have you ever met a child whose innocence had been shattered by tragedies so profound that their faith in everything good had been destroyed? What happens when someone known for portraying hope and love encounters a young person who has given up on both? This is the powerful story of how Jonathan Roumie's encounter with one angry, grieving child would test his own understanding of faith and lead to an unexpected journey of healing for them both. Marcus Chen sat rigidly in his hospital bed, his small arms crossed defiantly across his chest as he glared at the doorway. At 10 years old, he had already experienced more loss than most adults would face in a lifetime. 3 weeks earlier, a drunk driver had collided with his family's car, killing his parents and younger sister instantly, while leaving him with a broken leg and internal injuries that required extended hospitalization. The physical wounds were healing, but the emotional devastation seemed to grow deeper each day. The boy's aunt and uncle, his only remaining family, lived across the country and were still making arrangements to relocate and assume guardianship. In the meantime, Marcus remained in the hospital, surrounded by well-meaning staff and volunteers who tried to comfort him with platitudes about God's plan and everything happening for a reason. Each attempt at spiritual consolation only seemed to make him angrier, more withdrawn, more convinced that if God existed at all, he was either powerless or cruel. Jonathan had been volunteering at children's hospitals for years, usually finding that his gentle demeanor and genuine care for young patients created easy connections. Children typically responded positively to his visits, whether they recognized him from the chosen or simply appreciated having someone who listened to their fears and hopes without judgment. He approached each visit with prayer and humility, understanding that he was often meeting children and families during their darkest moments. The hospital chaplain had specifically requested Jonathan's visit to Marcus, explaining that the boy had been refusing all spiritual comfort and becoming increasingly isolated and angry. "He's brilliant," Chaplain Williams had explained during their brief meeting. "Reads at a high school level, asks questions that would challenge theology professors, but he's using that intelligence to build walls against anyone trying to reach him spiritually." The chaplain's concern was evident. Marcus was scheduled for discharge soon, but his emotional state remained deeply troubling. As Jonathan stood outside the room, he could hear Marcus speaking to his nurse with the same angry tone. "Tell whoever's out there to go away. I don't need prayers or Bible stories or people telling me my family is in a better place." The nurse's gentle response was barely audible, but Marcus's reaction was clear. "I don't care who he is or what show he's on. I've seen enough of God's love to last a lifetime." The bitterness in such a young voice was heartbreaking. Jonathan knocked softly on the door frame, not wanting to intrude, but also not willing to simply walk away from a child in such obvious pain. "Marcus, my name is Jonathan. I was hoping we could talk for a few minutes." He kept his voice calm and conversational, avoiding the overly cheerful tone that many adults used with hospitalized children. "I promise I'm not here to preach at you or tell you everything happens for a reason. I said I don't want to talk to anyone," Marcus replied sharply, though he looked curious despite himself when Jonathan stepped into view. The boy's eyes were intelligent and assessing, Taking in Jonathan's casual clothes and lack of clerical collar were obvious religious symbols. Especially not some actor pretending to be Jesus for money, he added, though the insult lacked the venom of his earlier comments, suggesting he was testing Jonathan's reaction more than expressing genuine hostility. Jonathan smiled gently, recognizing the challenge in Marcus's words. "That's fair. I am an actor, and I do get paid for my work on the show." He moved slowly toward the chair beside Marcus's bed, giving the boy plenty of time to object if he wanted privacy. "But I'm not here as an actor today. I'm here because Chaplain Williams mentioned you have some tough questions about faith and suffering. I figured maybe we could figure some things out together." Marcus studied Jonathan's face carefully, clearly trying to determine whether this was another adult who would dismiss his anger or try to explain it away with easy answers. "You want to know what I think about faith?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I think it's something people make up to feel better about a world that doesn't make any sense." He gestured toward his cast and the medical equipment around his bed. "If God is real and he's supposed to love everyone, why did he let my little sister die? She was 5 years old and never hurt anyone." The question hung in the air between them, raw and desperate despite Marcus's attempt to sound detached. Jonathan felt the familiar weight that came with such moments, the knowledge that his answer could either help begin healing or drive this hurting child further away from any possibility of comfort. He had learned through years of playing Jesus that the most important thing wasn't having perfect theological answers, but being willing to sit with people in their pain and confusion. "That's a really good question," Jonathan said finally, his voice serious and respectful. "And honestly, I don't have a good answer for it." Marcus looked surprised, clearly having expected either a dismissive response or a lengthy explanation about God's mysterious ways. "I've wrestled with that same question myself, especially when I meet kids like you who've been through things no child should ever have to face. The easy answers that adults give usually don't help much, do they?" Marcus's defensive posture softened slightly, though his expression remained guarded. "Everyone keeps telling me that God needed more angels, or that my family is watching over me from heaven, or that this is all part of some bigger plan I can't understand." His voice cracked slightly on the last words, revealing the profound hurt beneath his anger. "But if God is so powerful, why did he need to kill my family to get more angels? Why couldn't he just make new ones? It doesn't make any sense." Jonathan nodded thoughtfully, recognizing the sophisticated reasoning behind Marcus's questions. "You're right, those explanations don't make much sense when you really think about them." He leaned forward slightly, meeting the boy's eyes directly. "Can I tell you something? Playing Jesus on television has actually made me ask harder questions about faith, not easier ones. When you spend months trying to understand how Jesus would respond to suffering and injustice, you realize that simple answers usually are true answers." "So you don't know either?" Marcus asked, a hint of vulnerability creeping into his voice. For the first time since Jonathan had entered the room, the boy looked his age. Not like a miniature adult armed with intellectual defenses, but like a confused and frightened child trying to make sense of devastating loss. All these doctors and social workers keep acting like they understand everything, but you're saying you don't know why bad things happen? "I don't know why your family had to die," Jonathan admitted quietly. "I don't know why drunk drivers exist, or why 5-year-olds get hurt, or why someone as smart and good as you has to go through something so terrible." He paused, choosing his words carefully, "But I've learned that sometimes the most honest thing we can say is, 'I don't know,' instead of pretending we have answers when we really don't." Marcus was quiet for several moments, processing this unexpected honesty from an adult. "My mom used to take us to church sometimes," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "The pastor there was always talking about how God has a plan for everyone and how everything works out for the best." Tears began to well in his eyes. "I keep thinking about Emily, that's my sister, and how scared she must have been in those last seconds. What kind of plan includes a 5-year-old being scared and hurt?" Jonathan felt his own eyes moisten as he listened to Marcus's pain, The boy's grief was so pure, so devastating in its honesty, that it cut through every theological argument or pastoral comfort he had ever heard. "I don't think God wanted Emily to be scared," he said softly. "I think that's exactly the kind of thing that breaks God's heart, just like it's breaking yours right now." "But if God's heart is broken too, then why didn't he stop it?" Marcus pressed, leaning forward with the intensity of someone desperately seeking understanding. "Everyone says he's all-powerful, so he could have made that man not drink and drive that night. He could have made us leave 5 minutes later, or made the light stay red longer, or done a million things to save them." The logic was unassailable, the pain behind it overwhelming. Jonathan struggled for words that would honor both Marcus's intelligence and his grief. "Maybe," he said slowly, "the question isn't why God allows bad things to happen, but how God responds when they do happen." He gestured gently toward Marcus. "Like right now, you're hurting and angry and asking really hard questions. Instead of being mad at you for doubting, maybe God is right here in your pain, feeling it with you." Marcus shook his head firmly. "That's not good enough. Feeling sad about Emily dying doesn't bring her back. It doesn't make my parents not be dead. It doesn't make me not be alone." His voice rose with frustration. "I don't want God to be sad with me. I want God to have prevented this from happening in the first place. If he couldn't do that, then what good is he?" The directness of the question took Jonathan's breath away. Here was a 10-year-old articulating the problem of evil with more clarity than most adults ever managed, stripping away comforting abstractions to expose the raw reality of loss. Jonathan realized that any response that minimized Marcus's logic or pain would be both dishonest and harmful. This child deserved truth, even if that truth was uncomfortable or incomplete. "You know what?" Jonathan said after a long pause. "I think God might be big enough to handle your anger." Marcus looked surprised by this response. Maybe faith isn't about having all the answers or never asking hard questions. Maybe real faith is exactly what you're doing right now, refusing to accept easy explanations that don't actually explain anything. "But I don't have faith," Marcus protested, though his tone had lost much of its earlier hostility. "I don't believe in God anymore. How can you say I have faith when I think the whole thing is made up?" His confusion was genuine. He had been told by various well-meaning adults that his anger and questions were signs of lost faith, yet here was someone suggesting the opposite. Jonathan smiled gently. "The opposite of faith isn't questions or even anger. It's indifference. You care too much about justice and love and protecting innocent people to not have faith. You're just mad that the world doesn't work the way someone with real faith knows it should work." He paused, letting this sink in. "Emily mattered to you. Your parents mattered. That mattering, that's sacred, that's what God cares about too." Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, clearly fighting to maintain some emotional distance. "But caring doesn't change anything. Emily is still dead. My parents are still dead. I'm still alone." The stark recitation of facts seemed to steady him, returning him to the intellectual fortress he had built around his grief. "Caring just makes it hurt more." "You're right," Jonathan agreed. "Caring does make it hurt more. Love makes loss devastating in a way that indifference never could." He was quiet for a moment, remembering his own experiences with loss and the way faith had sometimes felt like a burden rather than a comfort. "But here's what I've learned. The fact that love makes loss so painful doesn't mean love is a mistake. It means love is the most real thing there is." "I loved Emily more than anything," Marcus whispered, his defenses finally beginning to crack. "She used to climb into my bed when she had nightmares, and I would tell her stories until she fell asleep. She laughed at everything, even my dumb jokes that nobody else thought were funny." Brushed tears spilled down his cheeks. "How am I supposed to just accept that I'll never see her again? How am I supposed to be okay with that?" Jonathan felt his own composure wavering as he witnessed the depth of this child's grief. "You don't have to be okay with it," he said firmly. "Maybe being okay with Emily's death would actually be wrong. Maybe the fact that you can't accept it means you understand something important about how precious she was, how wrong it is for little girls to die." "Then what am I supposed to do with all this anger?" Marcus asked, his voice breaking completely now. Everyone keeps telling me I need to forgive the man who was driving drunk, or find peace, or trust that there's some bigger picture I can't see. But I don't want to forgive him, and I don't feel peaceful, and I don't trust anything anymore. The honesty was raw and desperate, a child's plea for someone to tell him his feelings were valid. Maybe, Jonathan suggested gently, anger at injustice is exactly the right response. Maybe your anger is actually a form of love. Love for Emily and your parents, love for what should have been. He leaned forward, speaking with quiet intensity. Jesus got angry too, you know. When he saw people being hurt or taken advantage of, he got furious. Not because he lost faith, but because he had so much faith in what love should look like. Marcus looked up with interest, apparently not having considered this perspective before. Jesus got angry? I thought he was supposed to be all gentle and forgiving all the time. His knowledge of Jesus seemed to come primarily from sanitized Sunday school presentations that emphasized meekness while downplaying righteous anger. The pastors at our church never talked about Jesus being mad about anything. Jonathan smiled, recognizing an opportunity to share something meaningful about the character he had spent years studying and portraying. Jesus got so angry at people who were cheating the poor that he literally flipped over tables and chased them with a whip. He called religious leaders who cared more about rules than people some pretty harsh names. He paused, watching Marcus process this information. Being angry about injustice didn't make Jesus less faithful. It made him more faithful to what love actually demands. So you're saying it's okay for me to be mad? Marcus asked, as if this possibility had never occurred to him before. Everyone keeps trying to help me not be angry anymore. Like anger is the problem that needs to be fixed. For the first time since Jonathan had entered the room, something like hope flickered in the boy's eyes. But maybe being mad about Emily dying is actually the right way to feel? I think, Jonathan said carefully, that love and anger can live together in the same heart. Your anger shows how much Emily meant to you, how much your parents meant to you. That's beautiful, even when it hurts. He gestured toward the window, where afternoon sunlight was painting patterns on the hospital room floor. Maybe healing doesn't mean stopping being angry. Maybe it means learning to carry the anger in a way that honors what you've lost. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, staring out the window as he processed this conversation that was unlike any he had experienced since the accident. I miss them so much, he finally said, his voice small and vulnerable. Sometimes I forget for a few minutes, and then I remember all over again, and it's like losing them again each time. The admission seemed to exhaust him, as if maintaining his anger had been the only thing keeping him upright. That's normal, Jonathan assured him. Grief isn't something you get over, it's something you learn to carry, and the reason it's so heavy is because love is heavy. The bigger the love, the heavier the grief. He spoke from experience, having lost people he cared about, and learned that well-meaning advice about moving on often missed the point entirely. Maybe the goal isn't to stop missing them, but to find ways to honor them with how you carry their memory. I don't know how to do that, Marcus admitted. Everyone talks about keeping them alive in my heart, but that doesn't make sense to me. They're not alive in my heart, they're dead. Pretending otherwise feels like lying. His intellectual honesty, even in the face of devastating loss, was both heartbreaking and remarkable. This child refused to accept comfort that wasn't rooted in truth. Jonathan nodded, respecting Marcus's refusal to embrace comforting falsehoods. You're right, they're not alive in your heart. They're dead, and that's terrible and wrong and unfair. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But the love you had for them, the joy they brought you, the way they changed you by being in your life, that's still real. That's still yours. Death can take them away, but it can't take away the fact that loving them made you who you are. But I don't like who I am right now, Marcus said quietly. I'm angry all the time and mean to people who are trying to help. And I think terrible thoughts about God and fairness and why some people get to be happy while other people lose everything. He looked at Jonathan with something approaching desperation. Emily wouldn't recognize me like this. She would be scared of how angry I'd become. Jonathan felt a deep ache for this child who was condemning himself for having normal responses to abnormal loss. Marcus, you've been through something that would break most adults. The fact that you're angry and confused and questioning everything doesn't make you bad. It makes you human. He leaned forward, speaking with gentle intensity. Emily loved you when you were happy and silly and making jokes. Do you really think she would love you less now that you're hurting? Marcus considered this question seriously. His young face creased with concentration. She used to get upset when other kids were mean to me at school, he said slowly. She would try to make me feel better, even though she was little and didn't really understand what was happening. A small smile flickered across his face at the memory. One time she drew me a picture of us as superheroes fighting the bullies. She said I was the strongest person she knew. That sounds like Emily saw something in you that's still there, Jonathan observed. The person who protected her, who made her feel safe, who told her stories when she was scared. That person didn't disappear when she died. He's just hurting right now. Marcus's eyes filled with tears again, but they seemed different somehow. Less angry, more genuinely sad. Maybe being angry about losing her is actually a way of still protecting her, still standing up for her. I never thought of it that way, Marcus whispered. I just felt like all this anger meant I was becoming someone she wouldn't like. He wiped his nose with a tissue from the bedside table. That maybe being mad that someone hurt her means I still love her the same way I always did. The question was tentative, as if he was testing whether this new perspective could bear the weight of his grief. What do you think? Jonathan asked, recognizing that Marcus needed to reach this conclusion himself rather than having it imposed from outside. When you get angry about what happened to Emily, what does that anger feel like? Does it feel like love, or does it feel like something else? He watched as Marcus turned inward, examining his emotions with the same intellectual honesty he had applied to everything else. Marcus was quiet for a long time, his brow furrowed in concentration. It feels like I'm still her big brother, he said finally. Like I'm still supposed to keep her safe, even though I can't anymore. He looked up at Jonathan with something approaching wonder. I've been so mad at myself for not protecting her in the car, but I guess I'm still trying to protect her by being angry at the person who hurt her. Jonathan felt a surge of hope as he watched Marcus begin to reframe his grief in a way that honored both his love for Emily and his own need to process loss. That makes sense to me, he said softly. Big brothers are supposed to protect little sisters. The fact that you couldn't control what a drunk driver did doesn't change the fact that you were always a good big brother to Emily. But I should have done something, Marcus said, the guilt that had been eating at him finally surfacing. I was sitting right next to her. When I saw the other car coming, I should have, I don't know, pushed her out of the way or covered her with my body or something. His voice grew desperate with self-recrimination. I just sat there. I didn't even try to save her. Jonathan recognized the survivor's guilt that was compounding Marcus's grief, making him blame himself for circumstances that had been completely beyond his control. Marcus, you were in a car accident. Everything happened in seconds. You were 10 years old wearing a seatbelt. There was literally nothing you could have done differently. He spoke with firm kindness, hoping to penetrate the irrational guilt that was torturing this child. Emily's death wasn't your fault, not even a little bit. But if I had been faster or smarter or braver... Marcus began, clearly having replayed the accident countless times in his mind, searching for some action that might have changed the outcome. The fantasy of control in an uncontrollable situation was both understandable and devastating. There had to be something I could have done. Big brothers are supposed to protect their little sisters. You did protect Emily, Jonathan said firmly. You protected her every day of her life by being the kind of big brother who told her stories and made her laugh and made her feel safe in the world. He paused, letting this sink in. The fact that you couldn't protect her from a drunk driver doesn't erase all the ways you did protect her. It doesn't make you less of a big brother. Marcus looked skeptical, clearly wanting to believe, but struggling against months of self-blame. How do you know? You didn't know Emily. You don't know what kind of brother I was." The challenge was half-hearted, as if he wanted to be convinced but couldn't quite let go of his guilt. "Maybe I wasn't as good to her as I remember. Maybe I'm just telling myself that to feel better." Jonathan smiled gently. "I can tell what kind of brother you were by how much losing her is destroying you. If you hadn't loved her well, if you hadn't been the center of her world the way she was clearly the center of yours, this wouldn't hurt so much." He gestured toward Marcus's obvious pain. "Your grief is proof of your love. Your anger about losing her is proof of how good you were to her." "I just miss her so much," Marcus said, his voice breaking completely as the full weight of his loss crashed over him again. "I miss reading to her before bed, and helping her tie her shoes, and the way she would run to me when she got scared." He sobbed openly now, no longer trying to maintain the intellectual distance that had been his shield. "I miss being her big brother. I don't know who I'm supposed to be if I'm not Emily's big brother." Jonathan felt tears in his own eyes as he watched this child finally allow himself to grieve fully. "Maybe you'll always be Emily's big brother," he suggested softly. "Maybe that's something death can't take away, even when it takes everything else." He waited for Marcus's sobs to quiet slightly before continuing. "The love doesn't die when the person dies. The relationship changes, but it doesn't end." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked, wiping his eyes and looking at Jonathan with cautious interest. "How can I still be her big brother if she's not here?" The question was genuine, not challenging, a child seeking understanding rather than trying to win an argument. For the first time, he seemed open to possibilities beyond his own pain and anger. Jonathan chose his words carefully, knowing that Marcus would reject anything that sounded like false comfort or wishful thinking. "I mean that the way Emily changed you, by being your little sister, that's permanent. The kindness you learned from taking care of her, the protectiveness, the joy she brought out in you, those are all still part of who you are." He paused. "Maybe being her big brother now means carrying those gifts forward, living in a way that honors what she meant to you." Marcus considered this seriously, his sharp mind working through the implications. "So you're saying that I don't have to stop being her brother just because she's not here to be my sister anymore?" The idea seemed to intrigue him, offering a way to maintain connection without denying the reality of loss. The love part can continue even when the person part is over. "What do you think?" Jonathan asked again, recognizing that Marcus needed to test these ideas against his own understanding rather than simply accepting them from an adult. "When you think about Emily, when you remember the stories you told her or the way she laughed at your jokes, does that feel like love? Does it feel like being her big brother?" He watched as Marcus turned inward again, examining his feelings with characteristic thoughtfulness. "Yeah," Marcus said slowly, a note of wonder creeping into his voice. "When I remember her, it doesn't just feel sad, it feels warm too, like the love part is still there underneath all the missing her." He looked up at Jonathan with growing understanding. "Maybe I can still love her even though I can't take care of her anymore. Maybe I can still be proud of being her big brother." Jonathan smiled, feeling a sense of breakthrough in their conversation. "That sounds right to me. The job description of big brother might change when your little sister dies, but the love that made you good at the job, that's yours forever." He paused, then added gently, "And maybe part of your new job as Emily's big brother is making sure people remember how special she was, how much joy she brought to the world." "I could do that," Marcus said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I could tell people about her, about how smart she was and funny, and how she wasn't afraid of anything except spiders." A genuine smile crossed his face for the first time since Jonathan had entered the room. "She once tried to ride our neighbor's dog like a horse. Mom was so mad, but Emily just laughed and said she was practicing for when she got a real horse." Jonathan laughed softly, delighted to see Marcus's face light up with a happy memory. "She sounds amazing. I wish I could have met her." The simple statement seemed to surprise Marcus, who appeared to be realizing that Emily's story could bring joy to others, not just pain to him. "What else do you want people to know about Emily?" For the next 20 minutes, Marcus shared story after story about his little sister, his voice growing more animated with each memory. He told Jonathan about Emily's obsession with dinosaurs, her habit of hiding vegetables under her plate, her dream of becoming a veterinarian who specialized in fixing sad animals. With each story, Marcus seemed to reclaim a piece of himself that had been buried under grief and anger. "You know what I just realized?" Marcus said as he finished describing Emily's elaborate plan to build a treehouse for their cat. "When I tell people about Emily, I feel happy instead of just sad. Not because she's not dead, she is, and that still makes me angry. But because talking about her makes her feel, I don't know, more real, like she's still important, even though she's gone." Jonathan nodded, recognizing the healing that was beginning to occur. "Love wants to be shared," he observed. "When we love someone, we naturally want other people to know how wonderful that person is. Maybe that's one way love continues after death, through the stories we tell and the memories we share." He paused. Emily was lucky to have a big brother who saw her so clearly, who treasured all those little moments. "I did treasure them," Marcus said softly. "Even when she was being annoying or getting into my stuff, I liked having a little sister. I liked being the one she came to when she was scared or needed help with something." His expression grew thoughtful. "Maybe that's part of what makes this so hard. I was good at being her big brother. It was the thing I was best at in the whole world." "And you still are good at it," Jonathan pointed out. "The way you've been protecting Emily's memory, getting angry on her behalf, refusing to accept explanations that make her death seem okay. That's still being her big brother. You're just doing it in a different way now." He could see Marcus processing this reframe, considering how his grief might actually be a form of continued love and protection. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, staring out the hospital window as afternoon faded toward evening. "I think I understand what you meant earlier about anger and love living together," he said finally. "I'm still mad that Emily died, and I'm still mad at God for letting it happen. But I'm not mad at Emily, and I'm not mad at myself anymore for loving her so much that losing her hurts this badly." Jonathan felt a profound sense of gratitude for being allowed to witness this child's journey from despair toward something resembling peace. "That sounds like wisdom to me," he said softly. "Being able to hold both the anger about losing someone and the joy about having known them, that's the kind of complicated truth that simple answers can never capture." "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said, turning back to face Jonathan directly. "Do you really believe in God, or do you just play Jesus on TV?" The question was direct but not hostile, coming from genuine curiosity rather than the need to challenge or test. "Because, after everything we've talked about, I still don't know if I believe in God, but I feel like maybe it's okay not to know for sure." Jonathan considered his answer carefully, knowing that honesty was the only response that would honor the trust Marcus had placed in him. "I do believe in God, but my faith looks pretty different from what a lot of people expect," he said slowly. "Playing Jesus has actually made my faith more complicated, not simpler. I believe in a God who cries when little girls die, who gets angry at injustice, who doesn't have easy answers for why terrible things happen to good people." "So you don't think God wanted Emily to die?" Marcus pressed, returning to the question that had tormented him since the accident. "You don't think there's some secret plan that makes her death okay?" His tone suggested he was testing whether Jonathan's faith could withstand the same scrutiny he had applied to other adults' easy explanations. "No," Jonathan said firmly. "I think Emily's death is a tragedy, period. I think God grieves her loss just like you do, just like your parents would have." He paused, then continued with quiet conviction. "I think the God I believe in is less interested in having a plan that makes sense of suffering and more interested in being present with us while we suffer." Marcus nodded slowly, apparently finding this response more satisfactory than the theological explanations he had been offered previously. "That makes more sense to me," he admitted. "I couldn't understand why everyone kept acting like God killing my family was somehow good for me, or good for them, or part of some bigger good that I was too young to understand." He paused. "But a God who's sad about Emily dying too, that seems more like someone worth believing in." Faith doesn't require having all the answers, Jonathan observed. Sometimes it just requires being willing to sit with the questions, to hold space for both doubt and hope at the same time. He looked at Marcus with genuine admiration. You've been asking exactly the right questions, even when the questions hurt to ask. That takes courage. I've been so angry at God, Marcus confessed. Even angrier than I've been at the drunk driver, because at least he was just a regular person making a terrible choice. God is supposed to be perfect and all-powerful, so if he exists and didn't stop this from happening. He trailed off, then looked at Jonathan questioningly. Do you think God is mad at me for being angry at him? Jonathan smiled gently. I think God is big enough to handle your anger. I think maybe God even respects your anger, because it shows how much you care about justice and protection and love. He thought about the Psalms, full of human complaints and arguments with God. The Bible is full of people yelling at God about unfairness. If God didn't want us to bring our real feelings to him, why would he include all those angry prayers in the Holy Book? This perspective seemed to surprise Marcus, who had apparently been taught that faith required polite agreement with whatever God allowed to happen. You mean it's okay to argue with God? He asked, as if this possibility had never occurred to him. Even if I'm still not sure I believe in God, it's okay to be mad at him? I think authenticity is more important than politeness, Jonathan replied. If you're angry, be angry. If you're confused, be confused. If you're not sure what you believe, be honest about that too. He gestured toward Marcus. You've been more honest about your feelings tonight than most adults are willing to be. That kind of honesty is sacred, whether you think of it in religious terms or not. Marcus seemed to relax slightly, as if permission to be authentically confused was a relief after weeks of being pressured to accept comfort he couldn't feel. I don't think I'm ready to not be angry yet, he said quietly. Maybe someday, but not now. Right now, being angry feels like the only way to honor how much Emily mattered. He paused. Is that okay? That's more than okay, Jonathan assured him. That's love in action. That's caring so much about someone that you refuse to pretend their death doesn't matter. He met Marcus's eyes directly. Take all the time you need to be angry. There's no timeline for grief, no schedule for healing. Your love for Emily deserves to be honored, however you need to honor it. As evening settled over the hospital, Marcus seemed noticeably more peaceful despite his continued sadness. The rigid anger that had defined his demeanor when Jonathan arrived had softened into something more recognizable as normal grief. Still painful, but no longer toxic to his spirit. Thank you for not trying to make me feel better, he said unexpectedly. Thank you for letting me be angry and sad without trying to fix it. Thank you for being so honest with me, Jonathan replied. For sharing Emily's stories and letting me understand a little bit about how much she meant to you. He smiled warmly. You've taught me something important today about faith and doubt, and how love continues even after loss. I'm grateful for that. The genuine appreciation in his voice seemed to surprise Marcus, who wasn't accustomed to adults suggesting they had learned from him. What did I teach you? Marcus asked, genuinely curious. I thought you were supposed to be the one with answers, since you played Jesus and everything. His tone held no sarcasm now, just honest interest in how their conversation might have affected Jonathan. The idea that his questions and struggles could offer insight to someone else seemed to intrigue him. Jonathan considered the question thoughtfully. You taught me that real faith might look more like your honest questions than like easy answers that don't actually answer anything. He paused, gathering his thoughts. You showed me that love can be fierce and protective even in the face of loss. That anger at injustice can be a form of worship, and that refusing to accept false comfort is actually a kind of integrity. Marcus looked pleased, despite himself, a faint flush coloring his cheeks at the unexpected praise. I never thought of anger as worship before, he said slowly. But I guess when I get mad about Emily dying, I'm kind of saying that her life mattered too much for her death to be okay. He seemed to be testing this new framework against his own experience. Maybe being angry is actually a way of saying she was sacred. That's exactly right, Jonathan confirmed, moved by the boy's insight. Your anger is a testament to Emily's worth, to how precious she was, and how wrong it is that she's gone. He watched as Marcus processed this reframe, seeing how it allowed him to honor both his grief and his sister's memory. Some of the most faithful people I know are the ones who refuse to make peace with injustice. A comfortable silence settled between them as Marcus absorbed everything they had discussed. Outside the hospital window, the city lights were beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk, and the sounds of evening's changes echoed softly in the hallway. "I should probably let you go," Marcus said eventually. "You probably have other people to visit, and I've taken up your whole afternoon." "There's nowhere else I need to be," Jonathan assured him truthfully. "This conversation has been exactly what I needed today, even if I didn't know it when I walked in here." He glanced at his watch, surprised to see how much time had passed. "But I should probably check in with the nurses about visiting hours. Would it be okay if I came back to see you again before you're discharged?" Marcus nodded eagerly, then caught himself and tried to look more casual. "I guess that would be okay," he said with studied nonchalance. "I mean, if you want to. I know you're probably busy with your show and everything." Despite his attempt at indifference, the hope in his eyes was unmistakable. The prospect of continued connection with someone who understood his struggle clearly meant a great deal to him. "I'd like that very much," Jonathan said warmly. "And Marcus, would you do me a favor? Would you think about writing down some of those Emily stories you told me? Not for anyone else necessarily, but for yourself. Sometimes putting memories on paper helps us hold on to them more clearly." The suggestion was gentle, with offering a concrete way for Marcus to continue processing his grief while honoring his sister's memory. "I could do that," Marcus agreed, the idea clearly appealing to him. "Emily always liked it when I made up stories for her. Maybe I could write down the real stories about her life instead of imaginary ones." He paused, then added quietly, "Maybe someday I could share them with other people who want to know what she was like." As Jonathan prepared to leave, Marcus asked one final question. "Do you think Emily would be proud of me for talking about this stuff? For asking hard questions and being honest about being angry?" The vulnerability in his voice revealed how much his sister's approval still mattered to him, how her opinion continued to shape his understanding of himself even after her death. Jonathan smiled, remembering everything Marcus had shared about Emily's fierce loyalty and protective nature. "Based on everything you've told me about her, I think Emily would be proud that her big brother refused to accept easy answers that didn't make sense." He met Marcus's eyes directly. "I think she'd be proud that you loved her enough to get angry about losing her and brave enough to keep asking the hard questions even when they hurt." When Jonathan finally left Marcus's room, he found Chaplain Williams waiting in the hallway, clearly anxious about how the visit had gone. "How is he?" the chaplain asked immediately. "He's been so resistant to any kind of spiritual comfort. Did you make any progress?" The concern in his voice was genuine, though Jonathan detected an underlying hope for a dramatic conversion or sudden peace. "We had a good conversation," Jonathan said carefully. "He's still angry, still grieving, still asking hard questions about faith and suffering." He paused, choosing his words thoughtfully. "But I think he's beginning to understand that his anger might actually be a form of love, that his questions come from caring deeply about justice and truth. That seems like spiritual progress to me, even if it doesn't look like traditional comfort." Chaplain Williams looked somewhat puzzled by this assessment, clearly having hoped for a more conventional outcome. "So he's not ready to find peace with God's plan?" he asked, his tone suggesting this was the ultimate goal of spiritual care. "He's not prepared to accept that sometimes we can't understand God's ways." The questions revealed a theological framework that prioritized acceptance over authenticity. "I think," Jonathan said gently, "that Marcus is doing exactly what he needs to do right now. He's grieving honestly, asking important questions, and refusing to accept comfort that feels false to him." He paused, then added more directly, "Maybe our job isn't to help him find peace with what happened, but to help him understand that his struggle with it is sacred too." Over the next 3 days, Jonathan returned to visit Marcus each afternoon. their conversations gradually shifting from processing grief to exploring what healing might look like. Marcus had begun writing about Emily, filling a notebook with memories that captured both her personality and the depth of their relationship. The writing seemed to provide both outlet and comfort, allowing him to revisit joy without betraying his ongoing sadness. "I've been thinking about what you said about Emily being proud of me," Marcus told Jonathan during one of these visits. "And I realized something. She would also want me to be okay eventually. Not okay with her being dead, but okay with myself, okay with living without her." The distinction was important, showing Marcus's growing ability to hold multiple truths simultaneously. Jonathan nodded, recognizing the wisdom in Marcus's observation. "What does being okay with yourself look like?" he asked, genuinely curious about how this remarkable child was processing his path forward. "Not today necessarily, but someday when the grief isn't so sharp." The question invited Marcus to imagine a future that honored both his loss and his continued life. Marcus considered this carefully, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I think it means remembering that I was a good big brother and that Emily loved me, and that nothing about the accident changed that." He paused, then continued with growing confidence. "Maybe it also means finding ways to take care of other people the way I took care of her, not to replace her, but to honor what she taught me about love." "That sounds like a beautiful way to carry her memory forward," Jonathan observed. "Have you thought about what that might look like practically?" He was struck by Marcus's instinctive understanding that healing involved both honoring the past and engaging meaningfully with the future, rather than choosing between them. "Well," Marcus said thoughtfully, "Emily always wanted to help animals, and she loved it when I read to her. Maybe I could volunteer at the animal shelter, or read to little kids at the library." His voice grew more animated as he explored these possibilities. "Or maybe I could become a doctor like she wanted to be, and take care of kids who were scared in the hospital the way Emily would have." Jonathan felt moved by Marcus's instinctive connection between his own healing and service to others. "Those all sound like wonderful ways to honor Emily's memory while also using your own gifts," he said warmly. "You have such a caring heart, Marcus. Emily saw that in you, and it's still there even though you're hurting." As Marcus's discharge day approached, Jonathan noticed a significant shift in the boy's demeanor. While still clearly grieving and occasionally angry, he no longer seemed consumed by rage or paralyzed by despair. Instead,